All right, we're gonna start section 5.7, which is factoring, basically factoring by trial and error. But before we start, I wanna go through our checklist that you should be very familiar with by now. And I've added the new piece for our trial and error right here. This is gonna be a complete list for us now. After we finish trial and error, which I'm gonna call Criss-cross, we're not gonna learn anymore. So then we'll be completely finished with factoring. Now, step one, remember, you have to pull out the greatest common factor if there is one. The next step is to look for a special pattern. Now, we know that there's the difference of two squares, and they're gonna have two terms. That's how you can recognize them. They have two terms plus a minus between them. That's what the difference means. There's also a perfect square, and perfect squares always have three terms. So if something has three terms, I'm not going to consider the difference of two squares. And if something has two terms, I'm not going to try to test for a perfect square. Then you've got grouping, which really stands out because it's the only thing that has four terms. The next thing, if there's no special pattern, then you're going to try trial and error. And I'm going to be calling that Criss-cross instead, because there's a method that I really like that I'm going to be using for you guys, and I think it might be easier for you to remember Criss-cross than trial and error. So Criss-cross would be next, and these problems also have three terms, just like a perfect square. And the great thing is you can factor perfect squares using Criss-cross. So anything with three terms, you can use the Criss-cross method. Then you're going to make sure your problem's completely factored, and sometimes they go farther, right? You can break something down again. At the very end, if you can't do any of these things, not even a GCF, then you would say prime. All right, now, starting with the Criss-cross method, formerly known as trial and error, I'm going to show you FOIL to start with, because that's really the basis of Criss-cross. Now, when you FOIL, you're going to take two of these parentheses, right, and you're multiplying it out. So you get the F in FOIL stands for first. X times X, the first terms go here. Plus O, outer, the 3 and the X, so 3X. Inner, the inner would be kind of like cross eyes, right? 5X. And then the last comes from these two n numbers, 5 times 3, which is 15. And then these two are going to add together. So you end up with x squared plus 8x, right? They add, plus 15. Now, let's go through Criss-cross. So example 1. We'll start with y squared plus 14y plus 40. Now I'm going to look for a GCF, of course, and there isn't. I'm not going to give you GCFs with these yet, but you always would check for it. The other thing is it has three terms, so you would actually consider a perfect square before getting to Criss-cross. The problem is 40 is not a square. Y squared is, but 40 isn't. So these ends both have to be squares in order for it to be a perfect square. Now what you're going to do is put your two parentheses. See, we're going from here back to here. That's what factoring is. This is unfactored, and we're going to figure out what must be in the parentheses. So let me write here. Our directions would say to factor. Now, the easy part, what are the first pieces that go here? Well, they must multiply to y squared, right? This x squared came from x times x. So we would put y times y because that's going to give me y squared. That's the first thing you do. Now, the tricky part is figuring out what goes here. So this is where the little Criss-cross comes in. Going to make an X, and I think, Jason, you've used this method before, so this should be a little familiar to you. Put the last number in the top, and put the middle number in the bottom. Now, what you want to do, these two numbers have to multiply to 40, but these two numbers also have to add to 14. So, if I think about like, here, let me get a pencil. Let's say I tried 8 times 5. Well, 8 times 5 multiplies to 40, but 8 plus 5 adds to 13 and not 14. So those don't work, right? That's why it's called trial and error. You're trying different things, making mistakes, and trying new things. Okay, so what else could multiply to 40? Well, 4 and 10 multiplies to 40, and 4 plus 10 adds to 14. So these two numbers here, these guys, are going to go here. And it's positive 4, positive 10. So plus 4 plus 10. Now, watch how this works. If I were to check it, check by foiling, I get y squared first plus, the outer is 10y plus 4y, right? 10 plus 4. 10y plus 4y is going to give me 14y. There it is. And the last, these two have to multiply to 40 plus 40. So I get back what I started with. All right, so the idea is these yellow numbers multiply to the top one and add to the bottom one. All right, let's do the next one. Example 2. Okay, we're gonna factor. Let's go with m squared minus 11m plus 18. All right, so you're gonna put the two parentheses. Start off with the first, right? M squared, I need an m times an m to give me the m squared. Next thing, I'm gonna make a crisscross. So this n number goes on top. The middle number, now you've got to remember the sign though. Negative 11 will go in the bottom. I need two numbers that multiply to 18 that can add to negative 11. Now you might think of 6 and 3. That multiplies to 18, but that'll add to 9. And I notice if I have to add to a negative number, then I must need two negatives here to multiply to a positive and to add to a negative. So what if I were to do negative 6 and negative 3? That still multiplies to positive 18. And I add to a negative, but I add to negative 9, so that still doesn't work. All right, how about, so 6 and 3 are out. What else can make 18? Well, you can do 18 and 1, but I can't add to negative 11. Negative 18, negative 1 can't add to negative 11. But how about 2 and 9 can make 18. So let's say they're negative. Negative 2 times negative 9, positive 18. Negative 2 plus negative 9 makes negative 11. All right, so this works out. These two, right, they multiply to the top number and add to the bottom number. So I'm going to go negative 2, negative 9. Notice I'm not doing keep, change here anymore. Okay, let me go ahead and box my answers. So this was the answer for example 1. This is the answer for example 2. Okay, let's do let's do with factor p squared plus 13p plus 22. Right. Parenthesis, parenthesis, p times p makes p squared. Next step, do the crisscross. Last number goes in the top. Middle number goes in the bottom. Notice I'm not putting the p here, just the number. All right, I need two numbers that multiply to 22, and I also want them to add to 13. So if you can't think of both at the same time, just first start out by putting two numbers that multiply to 22. You could try 22 and 1. That makes 22, but that can't add to 13. So let's do 2 and 11. 2 times 11 multiplies to 22, and 2 plus 11 makes 13. So those two work. Now they're both positive, so p plus 2, p plus 11. All right, and remember, you can always check by foiling. Always check p squared, 11p plus 2p, 13p plus 22. That is what I started with, so it checks out. You really do want to mentally FOIL this out and make sure you've got this correct.